Across the wires and through the air, those who seek will find me there. Story, wonder, voice, and art find the ears and find the heart. Every kingdom dies eventually, even the shining ones, especially the shining ones. And perhaps that's why Camelot still fascinates us. Because Camelot was never merely a castle. It was an idea, a dream that humanity might one day become better than itself. A kingdom where strength served justice, where wisdom guided power, where knights defended the weak, and where civilization might rise from the chaos of a severely broken world. And for a brief moment out of time, held within the legends of King Arthur, it almost worked. But Arthurian legend was never written to end in triumph. It was always going to end in tragedy, because the same forces that built Camelot were already planning its destruction. In this episode, my dear listener, we are speaking of betrayal, of a doomed fellowship, and of a legend awaiting just beyond the mist. And why, after all of these centuries, the story of King Arthur still refuses to die. Welcome to Wishcrafting, where together we traverse time and space in pursuit of adventure. Tonight's adventure takes us to Camelot and its fall. But before we can understand Camelot's destruction, we first have to understand what Camelot represented. In many Arthurian stories, Camelot rises after chaos. Ancient Britain is fractured and violent and unstable, and King Arthur rises to unite the land, not merely through strength, but through vision. And the Round Table is really important here, because unlike ordinary medieval courts, Arthur's table has no head, no highest seat of honor. He's the king, but symbolically, this table represents equality amongst him and his knights. Whether medieval society itself truly believed those ideals is another discussion entirely, but mythically, Camelot becomes something sacred, a vision of order emerging through violence, a kingdom attempting to align an earthly rule with divine principles. And perhaps that's why part of these stories endures, because every generation longs for Camelot somehow, a just world with wise leadership and community and meaning and a strong core that holds in time of hardship and strife. But Arthurian legend understands something painful from the very beginning. Human beings struggle to sustain the worlds they dream of creating. Camelot doesn't collapse simply because evil exists or arrives, but it collapses because human beings fail to live up to the ideals that they themselves created. And unfortunately, that remains timeless. Stories like these serve as lighthouses in the dark, reminders of what humanity is capable of becoming, even if only briefly. Now, we talked about the Holy Grail in the last King Arthur episode, and after the Grail enters King Arthur's realm, something really shifts in these stories. The fellowship weakens, knights become divided and restless, and what they've been through starts to really weigh on them. They've traveled through the waste, they've come back to Camelot with its shining radiance, and their blinders have been completely pulled off. Some never returned from the waste, and those who did are transformed. Because the Grail doesn't just offer revelation, it exposes completely exposes. And this is one of the great truths hidden within Arthurian legend. Spiritual revelation does not necessarily mean good things. It doesn't mean ease. It doesn't mean a happily ever after. Sometimes spiritual revelation and growth reveals how fragile the situation truly is. And with that, the shining surface of Camelot begins to crack. And beneath its glory, human weakness was always waiting there, with jealousy and pride and desire and ambition, those things that fracture us. Very human things. Surely the workings of the Grail, revealing our holiness and our limitations side by side, because no earthly kingdom can perfectly contain divine truth. So slowly, the dream and the vision that Camelot represents begins to unravel from within. And now we arrive perhaps at the most famous relationship in Arthurian legend, Lancelot and Guinevere. And depending on the version of the tale, their love is portrayed differently. Sometimes it's romantic, sometimes it's tragic, sometimes it's catastrophic. But regardless of the interpretation, their relationship destabilizes Camelot from within. Because Lancelot is never merely a knight. He's often portrayed as Arthur's greatest knight, and his bestie. He's the embodiment of chivalry itself. And as we know, Guinevere is not merely Arthur's wife, but the symbolic heart of the kingdom. Earlier in the series, we spoke about how queens in Celtic traditions often carried echoes of sovereignty goddesses, figures symbolically tied to the land itself. The health in the kingdom reflected the health of the sacred union between ruler and land. So, Guinevere's betrayal becomes larger than personal heartbreak. It becomes symbolic fracture, the kingdom falling out of harmony. And perhaps most tragically, Arthur is often portrayed as knowing far more than he admits. In many tellings, he delays confrontation because he loves them, and exposing the truth would destroy not just Camelot, but also the relationship with the people that he loves. Which creates one of the great tensions of the legend. The more stories you hear, and the more you see behind the curtain of the legend, the more you can tell that Camelot survives for a time not because it's perfect, but because everyone in these stories is desperately trying to hold the dream together. Well, maybe everyone. Because there is one more person we haven't talked about. Mordred. Arthur's final enemy. But like almost everything in Arthurian myth, Mordred is complicated. In some stories, he is Arthur's illegitimate son. In others, he's his nephew. In others, still, he's just a tragic figure shaped by fate. But symbolically, what matters most is this. Mordred emerges from within Arthur's own bloodline. And this is important because Camelot is not destroyed by any foreign invasion, rather, it destroys itself, because Camelot is an extension of Arthur and his reign. And that's a really important distinction, because Arthurian legend ultimately becomes a meditation on the limits of human perfection. No kingdom can permanently outrun the flaws of the people who build it. We should put that on a sticker or a stamp and just put it everywhere. No kingdom can permanently outrun the flaws of the people who build it. And Mordred embodies everything Camelot tried to suppress. Violence, shadow, inheritance, consequences, and especially fate. Mordred is the crack in the foundation of Camelot finally splitting open. Throughout Arthurian legend, there is this terrible sense of inevitability. There are warnings and dreams and prophecies and characters that often know disaster is coming. And yet, the knights move towards disaster anyway. This gives the legends an almost gravitational sadness, closer at times to Greek tragedy than heroic fantasy. In Arthur's world, the future feels fixed, and Merlin often embodies this inevitable sorrow most of all. In many traditions, Merlin has the sight, and he sees Camelot's fall way before it ever comes, which transforms the legend into something heartbreaking. Not just a failed kingdom, but a beautiful thing that was doomed from the start. And perhaps that's why this story lingers so very powerfully in human memory, because we recognize ourselves within it. The knowledge that nothing golden lasts forever, and that beauty and fragility are so often intertwined, and that the brightest moments of civilization already carry the seeds of decline within them. And at last, we finally come to Camlan, Arthur's final battle, the place where Arthur and Mordred destroy one another. The details vary widely across traditions, but the emotional core remains the same. Brother against brother, kingdom against itself, the round table shattered. The dream dies in blood and mud, and in many versions, Arthur kills Mordred, but Mordred mortally wounds Arthur in return. A final mutual destruction. And afterwards, there is silence. The fellowship is gone, the kingdom is broken, and an age has ended. The bright and shining kingdom on a hill of Camelot ends in an uncomplicated victory. But you and I both know that Arthur's story doesn't truly end at Camlan, because in the mist after the battle, something very strange happens. The wounded king is carried away. Not entirely dead, not entirely gone, but taken across the water to Avalon. And you know, Avalon matters deeply. It's the Isle of Apples, the blessed island of youth, the healing shore beyond the edges of the ordinary world. Throughout Celtic mythology, islands across the Western Sea often symbolize the otherworld, places of healing, transformation, timelessness, and places without death. Avalon is the threshold of thresholds, and in many versions of the story, Morgan Le Fay herself becomes Arthur's guide through that threshold. She escorts Arthur towards mystery and towards his fate. And this is important, because Arthur doesn't get a simple death. He doesn't get a simple ending. Instead, he becomes a legend that leaves him suspended in time, sleeping beneath the hills and resting within those hidden chambers of Avalon just beyond the mist. He crosses a threshold, aided by the fairy queen Morgan Le Fay and a couple of other queens, and he becomes legendary. He becomes the once and future king. Sleeping under the hill and across the water until the world needs him most again. And Arthur is not the only one in this tradition. He's not the only sleeping king. Folklore across the world contains sleeping kings and hidden heroes, with many different figures resting between mountains, beneath the land itself, all waiting to return during a time of need. Whatever the myth, they emerge during times of uncertainty, and they preserve hope. The belief that the Golden Age is not entirely lost. That, my dear listener, is why Arthurian legend can't disappear. Not because historians can perfectly prove that Arthur was actually a real figure before he turned into this legend we have today. but because the longing that he represents towards that golden age and the belief and the hope in humanity itself remains unfinished. Arthur is so much larger than a king. He's so much larger than a man. He becomes a symbol of humanity's recurring hope that wisdom, courage, justice, and wonder still might coexist and might be available for us. Camelot falls. It always does. And yet every generation tries to build it again. That is the true magic of this legend. The striving for goodness and the belief that it still matters, even in a fractured world. It's stories like this that can preserve those ideals long after a kingdom has collapsed. King Arthur and Avalon still wait, shrouded in mist and apple blossoms, a shore beyond the known horizon. One that is available to every generation in its own way, as long as it's willing to go searching for it. And so, our journey through Arthurian legend comes to an end. From the wild wood of Merlin, to the waters of the Lady of the Lake, to the Holy Grail, Camelot, and the shores of Avalon. These stories never truly end. They simply wait, sleeping beneath the hills of memory until someone decides to pick them up and tell them once more. Until next time, my dear listener, may you walk gently with these stories in your hands. Walk gently with them between worlds. And trust that all roads will lead you back to Avalon. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this King Arthur series. If you want to find more of my work or contact me, give me some feedback on this series, I'd love to hear from you. But until next time, my name is Wishamaya. Don't forget to keep your roots deep and your dreams wild.